Morning, everyone. This is the sixth meeting of the 2022 Elected Official Compensation Commission. I'm Michael Kassler, Chair of the Commission. We'll go around the table. The commissioners will introduce themselves and also support staff.
Kiana Williams, Commissioner.
Robert Tobias from the City Attorney's Office.
Nia Walters, Columbus City Council.
Good morning, Greg Beaverson, Department of Human Resources.
Fred Rancier, Commissioner.
Jolene Wild, City Auditor's Office.
Good morning, Richard Blunt, Office of the Mayor.
Nicole Brandon, Human Resources.
Sarah Ingalls, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. In terms of our agenda this morning, we need to approve the minutes, and I also want to have a discussion of our public hearing that is scheduled for tomorrow evening and the plan and presentation format, if that's acceptable to everyone. Okay, so have you all received the meeting minutes from Ms. Walters?
Yes.
Are there any corrections or
Yes.
additions?
I just have one, it's the bullet point that says Commissioner Ingalls discussed whether to set the COLS. I think it's supposed to say COLA.
Oh, right, yeah,
It's just a typo.
yeah.
That's all I had.
Okay, if there are no other comments or corrections, could I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, next is a presentation from Mr. Beaverson on some new data that he's received.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. This is an update from a couple of requests that you had last week, and I hope everyone has a copy of that there in front of them. First page is a request to sort. We had the data sorted by mayor. There was a request to resort it by city manager. So that's what you see here. And like always, please stop me if you have questions. Second slide, table 2. There was a request to combine the salaries of the mayor and city manager. And that's what this slide shows.
So great, since I wasn't here. That was.
I wish I could remember.
Sorry.
We had a conversation last week about the mayor's salary. So when you look at just strictly mayor salaries, the Columbus mayor is number 2 in terms of salary ranges. But we also looked into city managers, because city managers make considerably more than mayors in different areas where they have both. And so we're kind of looking at, are the duties that the city manager do more closely aligned with the duties of our mayor, and should that be considered when we're looking at salaries, because some of those mayors may not do the same level of responsibility that our mayor has in Columbus. And so this was just to be able to kind of look at that data to kind of see like what the city managers, and so I looked last week at the city manager duties, which I can roughly run through for you. I think I still have it pulled up. But essentially, those duties were, the city manager is a chief administrative officer of the city, providing executive leadership and representation on all matters concerning city government. The duties and responsibilities of the city manager are determined by council in compliance with the city charter and state statutes. They are responsible for planning, directing, managing, and reviewing all activities and operations of the city, coordinates programs, services, and activities among city departments and outside agencies, ensures the financial integrity of the municipal organization, represents the city's interests, provides highly responsible and complex policy advice, and administrative support to the mayor and city council. So that was just one that I found online that kind of explained the duties of a city manager. However, we also did discuss that, with our mayor having a chief of staff, is some of the functions of a city manager things that are delegated to the chief of staff. And so that was an additional conversation that we had. We didn't make any determinations, but we just kind of wanted to have the conversation to kind of flesh that out and kind of see where the mayor should land with that in mind.
Thank you.
Would that be an adequate summary, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Someone has one.
Yeah, that was a good rundown.
I do have a couple of notes, but not that extensive.
Let me wake up.
One thing, Mr. Chair, if I can.
Yes,
just
ma'am.
point out, when we were looking at the mayor and city manager salary base, for example, Charlotte has a city manager and a mayor. They're the 14th largest city. Their mayor salary is around $50,000. The city manager is much more, so I just felt like, you know, if we're comparing only mayors, and especially in those where the city managers are doing some of the duties that you were outlining, it just didn't seem like an equal comparison. And that one being, you know, the 14th largest, we're the 15th, and, you know, so I just wanted to make sure, because I think Greg and I talked about it too, just wanted to make sure it was an equal comparison when we're talking about mayors. I mean, San Antonio mayor, that's around $75,000, and they're the 6th largest city. They don't have a city manager. So I just thought making sure we looked at all of it made the most sense. Okay.
The only other thing for me would be really trying to make an apples to apples comparison, because we don't know what the remainder of the complement of staff supporting those mayors who also have city managers are, right? Do they have chief of staff? How many special assistants to the mayors? Do they have all of those types of things? So to me, it feels like an easier comparison to go mayor to mayor versus consolidating the mayor and the city manager when we don't know what the full complement of staff looks like.
Yeah, I agree.
My poor recollection is that in some cities, our auditor and those duties fell inside, and I just don't remember, the mayor's office or a city manager's office. Do you recall that? City attorney, those would be appointed out of the mayor or city manager positions. So when the definition was read that responsible for the fiscal side, then that raises a question, do we have an independent elected official that's serving that role? And I think last time we talked about the CFO kind of duties falling under the auditor's office and not under the mayor slash, what is it called again? City manager.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Right.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's exactly what I mean about the complement of staff. And then I think, to Naya's point, she found a generic city manager job description, right? And so we don't know if that's necessarily applicable to all of the places that have a city manager. So it just feels like it just muddies it a little bit when we collapse it together. I do appreciate the point, though, of making sure that we take into totality all that our mayor is doing.
Ms. Wilds, on the issue of chief financial officer, auditor, payroll, there are all kinds of responsibilities that the auditor has. Do you consider the auditor to be the chief financial officer of the city?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we did a little comparison because the numbers that we saw coming through on the comparatives were much lower than Auditor Kilgore's salary. And we looked at Austin, Charlotte, Denver, Nashville, and St. Louis just to get us started, and actually took our auditor's responsibilities and saw where they fit in those organizations. And on the most part, it fell in the CFO area, which, you know, the salaries are, you know, over $200,000 in that area for those cities that we looked at. Typically, when we're getting an auditor from another city, they're talking about an internal auditor, which is somebody who is, you know, looking for, you know, improvements in internal controls and trying to identify, you know, errors in accounting and those kinds of things. It's not the chief financial officer of the city.
So if the auditor here in Columbus is the chief financial officer, what do you call the director of finance under the mayor?
The director of finance. I don't know. Yeah.
The auditor monitors what comes in, the director of finance monitors what's going out, and I don't know how you do your finance. It's more important to me to know what the heck's going out. But, you know, knowing what comes in, so they balance each other out. I mean, I don't think that Auditor Kilgore monitors as closely the expenditures as the finance director and the mayor.
Well, one of the things that is added to the auditor is the payroll oversight. So payroll falls under our office, which is where most of our dollars are going out. So, that is something that she does that doesn't fall in that area for our comparable cities.
But the auditor does have the responsibility of, if some agency wants to, submits an ordinance to expenditure ordinance, the auditor won't approve that, and it won't come to council and won't get on the agenda if the money's not there and it hasn't been appropriated, right?
Correct. The first thought for an ordinance is
Yeah.
the auditor to make sure that the funds are available for expenditure.
Okay.
That's correct. So that is an additional responsibility to the comparable cities that we were looking at.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Do the bond issues and like the sale and purchase of bonds as an additional duty of the auditor here in Columbus?
Yes.
Okay,
And sometimes that falls under a finance director in other cities. Also, she's part of the Treasury Investment Board, so also looking at the investments that we're making as well.
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we have that part of it on the record, because I know that's another duty that she has.
Okay, Greg?
Yes, sir. The next slide, Table 3, on part of that issue, there was a request to make a comparison, in other words, calculate the differentials between the mayor's salary and the attorney's salary, and the mayor's salary and the auditor's salary. Just something to point out in the calculation here, a negative number means that the attorney or the auditor is paid less than the mayor. I did want to point out Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Indianapolis, since I know that those are cities that are being focused on, did not receive information. Well, the information I received, from Cleveland was that there was no equivalent attorney or auditor. Same with Cincinnati for the auditor. In Indianapolis, that is information that we have not captured. Their response was, I'm sorry, when can we get to this? So, that's, yeah. But we've gotten as much as information, and we can still get as much information as needed. But that's slower going. The last slide.
And if I could interrupt, I think this last slide is the closest thing we have to apples. These are all municipalities where there is a mayor, council form of government, no city manager, et cetera. Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, sir, exactly that. It's essentially the same list from the previous page with cities without city managers removed.
And those are just, so you have those in alphabetical order there,
They are.
not a rank order, okay. Any questions of Mr. Beaverson? Okay, if not, what I'd like to do now is move on to our plans for the public hearing tomorrow evening at 5:30. I've been to a lot of public hearings over the years. I've been to a lot of public hearings where nobody comes to the public hearing. However, we now have, because of technology, we broadcast these online, right? So we don't know who is really watching our public hearing. And because of that, we need to give a presentation, even if there aren't any warm bodies in council chambers for that. So to that end, Ms. Walters, would you talk about your presentation for the hearing tomorrow, please?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I was looking for the public hearing announcement, and I was having trouble finding it. Would you mind directing me to where it is?
So it goes in the bulletin, but I'm not sure.
Okay, because I just haven't seen it, but.
Okay. There was an email that went out yesterday and last week, but I can forward you the email.
I saw it on my citywide email. I think.
Electronic meetings, we may not know specifically who is attending, but we know if there is attendance, right? I mean, if I dial in or however you do this, it notes that I'm in the meeting, but it doesn't designate who I am. Is that true or not true?
With call-ins, yes, but a lot of people watch on like YouTube or Facebook, and so it doesn't, there's no way for us to kind of know who is watching. We can know about how many people are watching, so if it's on Facebook, it'll say 9 people are watching, but I have no idea who those 9 people are. And same with YouTube. YouTube can tell you how many, because it's live. Does that make?
And do they, those people that are watching, do they have a means of asking a question or making a comment?
Through Facebook and YouTube, they cannot actually ask a question, but they can make a comment. And so in past, when there are multiple people there, someone can kind of monitor the Facebook and YouTube comments to see if there's anything that comes through. So I can see if I can have additional staff there to help with that so that that can be monitored, because it will be hard for me to monitor that and kind of pay attention to what's going on in the hearing.
I don't understand. How they can make a comment, but they can't ask a question? How is that?
Well, what I'm saying is, it's not like they can come online and say, hey, I want to ask a question, but they can leave a comment in the comments, and their question can be in the comments, but it's not like they can, like on a WebEx, someone can be unmuted and ask an actual question, and we can answer it live, real time.
Okay.
On these socials, they can comment, and if we see the comment and are able to answer the question, we can do that. But it's not an interactive connection. Go ahead,
I
Robert.
can provide some clarity on it. So there's definitely a distinction made between a virtual meeting that you're having, where you absolutely must give the public an opportunity to interact with and hear and participate, versus streaming it for folks to just listen in. So if you had decided to have a virtual meeting on WebEx or Zoom, then the public would have to be able to see and hear and actively participate in the meeting virtually. But in this instance, the meeting is being held as a public meeting in City Hall, right, in council chambers. So legally, anybody who wants to participate or ask a question would need to physically come down to council chambers to do that. If you want to allow people to ask questions through the comments section on the streaming service, that's just a courtesy that you're going to be extending to folks. And if NIA is able to get an additional staff member to monitor that and then kind of ask those questions, you can do that as a courtesy, but you're not legally required to do that.
Okay, is it the sense of the commission that we do want to allow the public to make comment and pose a question in that hearing?
Or if comments or questions, we will not have finalized our recommendations at that point. So we're asking for public input based upon a general description of what we have completed that you will be presenting. This then, and the law is shifting on this issue, I think, as well, as to public meetings, if they can be virtual or non-virtual and things like that.
Well, there's emergency legislation in place now that allows for virtual meetings through, everybody says June 30th, it's really actually through June 29th, because they messed up a word and it actually ends on the 29th. That's the lawyer in me speaking.
But this was really my question. At council meeting, if I'm not present, I can't ask a question.
You mean as a member of the public?
Yes, it's an
Well-
open public meeting.
It depends on whether council's holding the meeting virtually or not. If they're doing both, like some people can show up in person and there's a virtual option, then you could ask a question virtually if they're holding it that way. But if they're just holding it in person and streaming it, then in order to ask a question legally, you would have to physically show up in person. The other comment I was going to make about your particular meeting tomorrow evening is, if you're 5 or 10 minutes into the meeting and there's nobody on that streaming service and you waited 10 minutes, Naya doesn't, and nobody shows up in person, Naya doesn't even need to make the presentation. You could just conclude the meeting, because it's for public comment purposes. And if nobody from the public shows up or has any questions to ask, you can just conclude your meeting.
It's time that's saved. Correct?
I don't know if that's recorded.
Yes, they're recorded, so the meeting will be on, it will be on CTV, it will be on YouTube, it will be on Facebook Live. So YouTube, you can go back and watch videos. So if you do a hearing, no matter the hearing, it's on YouTube and you can go back and watch it. So the point of the hearing really is so that, I mean, even if we're giving, people can go back and watch any of our meetings. So they can watch this live, or they can go back and watch this. So what will happen is that meeting, will be live. And so if we go forward with the meeting, regardless if people are there or not, people can watch it later. They can come back and say, oh, I want to see what's going on there, what happened at their public hearing. Did anyone show up? Did anyone say anything interesting, et cetera? So, I mean, it's saved in that part.
You could do the presentation and just have it saved, right?
Yes.
I feel strongly that we should, whether anybody shows up at the council meeting or the hearing tomorrow or not, that we should have a presentation that the public can see. And if we have the technology to allow them to pose a question or make a comment, we should allow that. Is there any?
I'm hoping I'm trying to recall however, there was one person who showed up. And, you have any questions about we did, I think, essentially what we're proposing to do now. This is the kind of describing, we've come together and looked at this various information. We're trying to make any decisions. Do you have any comments? And this person said, I showed up because it's a public meeting. And, very interesting, didn't know this goes on, glad to hear it, that kind of thing.
And a very different time, right? So we weren't doing things virtually at that point in time. So, I mean, I first of all, I'm not going to be there. So, I rely on the people who are going to be there to say. But I agree, we should allow for comments. We should do the presentation. I think the pause in my mind is to the point that Naya said around whether or not she was going to have staff who can monitor for questions. If we set the expectation that if you put a question in the chat, are we going to be able to get to them all? And I think that is determined by whether or not you'll have staff to do that, or if there's another mechanism post the meeting for us to respond to people's questions.
Yeah, I mean, because you can always respond to a Facebook question. I will say that in a lot of public hearings, you don't really get a lot of questions. You get more complaints than anything else, because I had to monitor them for another commission. But at that time, things were still very much virtual because of COVID. But because I'll be presenting at the hearing, I will not be able to monitor that and make sure that we can answer those questions. And so that's, I think, part of the point of us having it in person is so that people do have comments or questions, and so they can come to City Hall. But also, people can still reach us at any time via email. So our email is eocc@columbus.gov. So whatever questions they have, I would actually encourage them to direct their questions to our email. And that's something that I'm going to mention in the presentation. Direct your comments to our email instead of doing them in Facebook or YouTube. Because you have bots and all kind of other things that are on those social media channels. And so that would be my recommendation, is to, if people come to the hearing and they want to speak, great. If they're unable to make it, please send us an email to our email address at eocc@columbus.gov.
Who answers?
And I answer those emails.
Right, so the only concern would be is if you provide an answer that the commission is not satisfied with or wanted to be more thorough or complete. So I would say at a minimum at this meeting, have you answered any questions via email as of yet?
No, we haven't gotten any questions via email as of yet, but what I have done in the past is I have forwarded, if it's something specific to the commission, I'll forward it. If it's something strictly like legal, or it's like, I have a question about this law or this provision of the charter, those questions I answer because that's kind of my role here. But if there is something specific, I forwarded those questions to the commission, and sometimes the chair just responded to the person directly and it kind of eliminated me from the picture.
So, lastly, what does the notice say to the public about comments?
The notice does not address comments to the public at all. The notice really just says that we're having a public hearing at this time, this date, in City Hall.
And it doesn't indicate that it's a virtual meeting,
No.
so they would need to come in. I mean, I think the expectation
Okay, so the expectation would be that you must come.
Yes.
Okay.
We haven't given them we haven't given them the opportunity to think that they could participate virtually, but we have, it's streamed live because that's part of what we do at council.
And then lastly, again, how long are we going to keep open the opportunity to respond to comments?
When you say, what do you mean by that?
24 hours, 48 hours? If you have any comments, make them in the next, submit comments in the next,
I mean-
because the Wednesday that follows, I believe, is when we are likely to come to conclusion on our work. So we don't want questions coming in indefinitely, I wouldn't think.
No, we don't want questions coming in indefinitely. But again, the comments are open at elcc@columbus.gov until, pretty much until we make a determination at the hearing, or at a meeting and say, we are putting forth recommendations to a vote to you all as commissioners, and you all vote to submit your recommendations. So that information can be shared, people will see this, and so at that meeting, we can say, thank you to the public who have engaged in this process thus far. Now that we've submitted our recommendations, we will no longer be accepting comment as it relates to that. And so I think it's just kind of a culmination at the end where you kind of make that known. But that would be my thought. Robert, do you have anything?
No, that's correct.
Okay.
As long as it's perfectly clear, and that's, that I have a time frame in which to speak, or forever, waived.
I think as long as people can email us and, we get those updates and people are able to come in person tomorrow, I'm comfortable. I would like, if people could testify virtually, but if we don't have that set up, we don't have it set up. And, as
Let's
long
be
as
clear
we
on
can do
that.
that.
Can you set that up?
I don't know that it's able to be set up because the hearing is tomorrow, and we have not published it that way. We just published it as a regular hearing, which is what we've kind of been doing, is going back to in-person hearings. I think during this process, it was determined that there was going to be another extended emergency legislation that would allow for virtual, but when we started this, that wasn't the case. And so we had intended for everything to be public, where you had to come in as a result of that. So I think that we are, at this point, pretty well settled into it being a public hearing. So if people cannot make it, again, I encourage them to submit questions via email.
I think the posting it yourself or the notice for the public hearing, and I don't know, you two being the attorneys can probably clarify, but it does say, residents wishing to attend the hearing in person may do so in council chambers and wear a mask if they so choose. They may also participate virtually, either through Facebook or YouTube. And it doesn't sound like, they may view it on Facebook or YouTube, but I don't know that their participation is really virtual. I don't know if that's an issue.
What
That's
you're reading from is from the bulletin, the notice for tomorrow's meeting?
Yeah, so by
Media
participating,
advisory?
Well, what does participate mean?
Right, I
That's-
just wanted to say that, just so that while we're talking about it.
Yeah, and moving forward, watch and comment is probably a better phrase
Yeah.
to use than participate, because that would imply that you can actively interact with the folks in the meeting. But again, it's probably, at this point, just leave well enough alone.
yeah, and that's kind of like, I kind of stole that from standard boilerplate language, so that's something that, just for us to have a conversation generally about, of saying watch and comment versus participate, and I guess by participate, we just mean you're able to view.
Participation then, tomorrow, you can submit questions to this address. That has to be the virtual participation.
And then-
in the language of the notice.
On the email that we sent to the listserv, it just says at council chambers. It doesn't even give them that opportunity to participate any other way outside of that way.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, I've participated in many council member meetings virtually, and usually you have to sign up by 3 PM, and then you get a slot, and then you sit there and you wait until it's virtual testimony time, and then you get your 3 minutes or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
just to be clear for the public, that is not what will be available. What will be available is viewing online, and you may comment, but we may not be able to respond immediately. However, if you send an email to eocc@columbus.gov, then we could integrate that into either tomorrow's meeting or a prior, or later meeting.
And I'm happy to also check, even if we don't check it during the actual hearing tomorrow, I'm happy to look at the Facebook and YouTube comments after the meeting to see if there was anything that you all might want to respond to. So that it doesn't mean that it's never getting responded to, it's just not in real time.
So,
So this gives me more confusion. So I'm not at my last one, my last question again. If I'm responding only on Facebook, then nobody else knows the question or the answer, unless I'm on Facebook.
No, everybody can see it on Facebook, and everybody can see it on YouTube.
Well, I don't use Facebook personally, but that has nothing to do with my concern here. If I'm only responding through one of those vehicles, and there are people there are some age barriers here. There are some people who lived in the city for very long periods of time who may have some very legitimate questions. Facebook isn't a way they're going to receive that answer.
I'm not saying that I would give the answer on Facebook. I'm saying I would review the questions on Facebook, and I would respond. I would just say, hey, we got this question, and we can discuss it at our meeting. So that way, because on Facebook, there isn't an email that I can respond back to. I can respond to the comment on Facebook, but we can also have an open discussion at our meeting, and I can say, hey, we got this comment on Facebook. We can discuss that at our next meeting in an open forum like how we are now.
So if we didn't have access to Facebook or YouTube and we were only doing this in person and somebody submitted a question, how would the general public find out about that question?
Question better asked than the way I did.
Go ahead, Robert.
There's no legal requirement that the general public is aware of that question. If you want to be aware of the question, show up at the public meeting.
So I
Right.
think that was my question.
Yeah.
well, we have
Just one second, Michael.
Yeah, sure.
So your answer to my question is the only way people find out about a question is if they show up to the meeting in person.
Well, again, I'm drawing.
I don't want the legal response. I want to understand how it happens in practice.
Well, my understanding is that's how it happens in practice. I'm just drawing a distinction between what's legally required versus what could be extended as a courtesy if you're concerned about transparency. And if you want to make other accommodations for transparency purposes, to put it somewhere where the public could access it and look at it versus what's legally
Well,
required.
no, what I'm just saying is we just need to do for who's online what we're doing for the people in public, right? Because the session is tomorrow. So if it was all in public, the only way you would know what the question is if you show up in person, then what the correlation to me would be a question that's on Facebook would be read live during the session.
That's the best way to handle it.
Exactly.
And that's what I was alluding to. But I was saying that if we did that, because I'm also presenting in the session, it would be very difficult for me to both monitor Facebook and YouTube and also be actively in the session.
Right.
And
that's
so I
why
was saying,
said, did you have additional staff that you could provide?
and so I do not have additional staff, but I could ask maybe a coworker or a colleague if they were able and willing to assist me. But I don't have that.
Well, so you're going to make a presentation tomorrow. After your presentation, you can then see if focus your attention on whether there have been any comments or any questions posed, and you can share that with the commission then? Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's just more complex. I need to make sure that you guys have what you need. There are a lot of things that will be happening in a public hearing, and so I don't want to not be paying attention because I'm trying to check YouTube and Facebook myself. I would rather have someone else have that responsibility so that I can pay attention to make sure that everything needs to happen in the hearing and you all needs are met during the hearing.
Well, that's fair. And we need that additional person at the public hearing tomorrow. And if I don't know who I need to talk with about that, but I think that's critical. Pardon me?
I think I can help with
Oh,
that.
thank you, Ms. Wiles.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all here as staff members, so We can staff that too.
Great,
Yeah,
wonderful.
Happy to do it.
Someone gets YouTube, someone gets Facebook.
See what happens in the digital divide.
Silence it.
What's that?
See what happens in the digital divide. You and me are looking at this and saying, wait, it looks nothing like a public meeting to me. With this person
That's what
and
happens
stuff
when
going
you're
on.
retired, huh? Okay. Ms. Walters, do you, Ms. Walters, do you have can we proceed with you going over briefly your presentation for the public hearing tomorrow?
Yes. So Chair and Commissioners and staff, this is a very brief presentation that you all have in front of you for tomorrow at the public hearing. So there is some brief information about the commission that starts off. And then I go into the charter provisions. I think those are probably the most important piece of the presentation tomorrow, just to kind of help the public understand what our charge is as it relates to the charter. In addition to the charter provisions, I have the current compensation as of 1/1/2022. I think that Greg will be adding an additional slide that kind of goes into the additional information, because essentially we know that each year after 2022 is the base salary plus the COLA. And so I didn't include that information, but it is something that I think he's going to add in a slide that kind of addresses what happens going forward, even though those are just kind of hypothetical numbers, because we don't know what the COLA, we don't know what that's going to look like 100%.
That's correct, not until that the year is almost over, we won't be able to calculate it. But my understanding is also that we'll be going over the calculation itself, how that's performed.
Yeah, I want you to explain to the public how you come up with those numbers, the timeline on that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Understanding that was the recommendation of a prior commission.
Right.
Doesn't mean that we have to follow that line of thought forward. Because our salary recommendation doesn't come into effect until 2025, 2026.
What I want Mr. Beaverson to explain is what is already on the books, if you will.
Okay.
Council has adopted an ordinance specifying this. The mayor has signed that ordinance. And these salary levels, while we don't know the specific dollar amounts, we know what the formula is to calculate them.
Correct.
So that's what I want an overview of.
Yes, current practice, how we arrived at this point, yes.
And
Yes.
I want to draw special attention to the charter provision slide, the middle one. It has code section 15-4. 15-4 is a code section that we have been talking about as a commission when we've been asking what is required of this commission concerning COLA. And so to ask the city attorney for what we are required to do, it's my understanding from a brief read of this, it says, within 3 months of appointment, the commission must submit to the city clerk a report of recommendation for the salary of each elected officer of the city, including an annual cost of living adjustment, which shall not exceed the average increase in the CPI or successor thereto during the preceding 4 years. However, that, like Fred was saying, that does not mean that we have to use the formula for CPI that was agreed to on the last commission. It does mandate that we have a COLA, or an annual cost of living adjustment, whatever that means. So I just,
What are you saying, the annual cost of living adjustment is not necessarily a COLA? as
no,
defined
I think
by-
the annual cost of living adjustment is a COLA, but how you calculate COLA is that formula that we had the presentation on, a few sessions back. And that's what the previous commission adopted as the formula to calculate COLA. I don't know that it's codified that we have to use that formula. As long as we have a COLA, whatever that means, we do have to have a COLA, is how I read that. I would like clarification.
My understanding was that the COLA is linked to the consumer price index, and it depends on, from what he said, there's like 10,000 different CPIs, and which one are you going to use? And I believe he made some recommendations about which ones you should think about using. And I think, to your point, the one that was used in the last go-around doesn't necessarily need to be the one that you use in this go-around, but you should pick one in terms of how you're going to calculate what the COLA should be. And I, and I do agree with your reading of 15-4 from the charter that the COLA calculation absolutely needs to be included in the report.
And so the reason why I don't want to bind this commission to the last, given some inflation, some unusual and unanticipated inflationary factors that we will be meeting in the future years, is there a better COLA balance than the one that was adopted previously? Given there's 10,000 of them, I'm just not as.
That's a good question, but I don't know the answer.
I have no idea what the answer is.
Do you deal with that stuff?
But we could ask Bill, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not how we calculate annual increases.
Yeah.
Wondering who
Yeah,
else,
it just
who else
says-
does?
It just says COLA adjustment, which shall not exceed the average increase in the CPI. That's the direction.
Which we've interpreted to mean average the past 4 years.
Well,
Right.
the charter actually says the last 4 years. I have it right here. It's section 15.4, an annual cost of living adjustment which shall not exceed the average increase in the consumer price index or successor thereto during the preceding 4 years. And that's been the calculation since the first year it was done, 2018. If I can just put this out there, the calculation that's been used, that was recommended by Dr. Lafayette 2 times, is all items Midwest, size Class A, all urban consumers not seasonally adjusted. Midwest size Class A. So yes, of the thousands of versions of these series that are out there, this is the one that he recommended. I think the commission could go back and review the report that Dr. Lafayette provided for additional information. I don't, off the top of my head, recall if there was some additional recommendation that he made, or you could do this, but you should really be doing this, or something to that effect. I do remember he said something to the effect of maybe it shouldn't be the last 4 years, and he gave a reason why. That's just my recollection.
But we can't change that unless the charter is amended, because
The-
it does
the-
have to be the last.
Right, the charter itself says during the preceding 4 years. That's a direct quote from the charter.
Okay,
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
yes, Keisha?
Yes, thank you. I'm like, it looks green, but I can't tell. I wanted to ask, I just wanted to make sure that in this presentation, since there is this confusion about participation and the switch from COVID and now we're back in person, that there could be a slide at the top that talks about that, and a slide at the end that talks about that. That the participation, whatever we're defining participation as, that you have a slide in the beginning telling people that, and at the end that, because the language is confusing and we're in the middle of a switch. So I wouldn't want people to join and we don't share that information up front at the top of the meeting.
Okay. So, and I don't, would you like me to do that, or would you like Chair Castro to say, hey, thank you for anyone that's,
Why don't I do that? We'll
Yeah.
agree upon what I say, but,
Yeah.
yeah,
more suited for you to do that?
Yes.
And then to say, like, you know, thank you for joining, if you join us via Facebook or YouTube, or if you're here with us in council chambers. If you are not here with us presently and you would like to submit any questions to us, submit them to eocc@columbus.gov, and then close out repeating that email to them. And then I can add a slide at the end of it to say, if you have any questions, please email this, so that way they'll see that email again. And so that will be a total of 3 times they're seeing the email.
is that acceptable?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, fine.
Can I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
So we talked about, I did include the cities that were surveyed by the commission. I did not include Indianapolis, because I know that we got very, very tangential information from them. I did include Cleveland and Cincinnati, per Greg's.
We got more information from them than Indianapolis.
Yes. And so then I kind of just went into thank you, and that was kind of the wrap of my presentation, and I'll add the email in between there. I didn't go too in-depth because I was like, I think that this was just kind of like a opener, an overview, and then I intend to leave to you, the commission, to kind of discuss things more detailed. I know that Greg and I are going to work together, and he's going to add a couple of slides regarding things that he's going to present on at the hearing. But I sent this to you all last Friday, so were there any additions, any additional things that you want me to talk about or kind of get at, other than what's here?
We're gonna have a brief agenda as to who are gonna be speaking, and then open to public.
We'll have presentations from Naya and Greg, and,
Presumably you.
well, yeah, I'll introduce the meeting, and then we'll open it up for comments from commissioners, and in the meantime, we'll see if there are any comments or questions from the public.
I think that maybe one of you or a conglomerate of you should plan to give someone of an overview of what's already been done. That's kind of what I was saying when I was talking about this last week, is that you all will kind of say, here are some of the things that we discussed for people that haven't been watching the meetings. And it doesn't have to be very lengthy, but kind of like an overarching summary of like, here are some of the things that have come up in our discussions that we're considering as we're looking at the salary recommendations. Again, because we don't have any firm anything yet, it's just very tangential, but I think just kind of having a brief overview of that is important.
Okay, that's good.
So, Naya,
Yes.
where you say, current compensation as of 1/1/2022, it says an increase of 2%, increase of 20, increase of 20. We're gonna explain that clearly to the public, what the increase means, because they're not gonna get that every single year, right? It's just the one. Okay.
I think for the presentation, I didn't want to overload with information, so I'll say, this was the, well, the way that I was viewing is that we would say like, from the last, when they set the commission, this was an increase of their pay prior to this, of this amount of percentage, so people know that like in the last commission, the commission granted them an increase of this, and that is where the salary starts at, based on that.
Yeah, but
increase.
left there alone, I don't think it gives adequate explanation for why
No,
these increases
That's what I
were
was saying,
recommended.
is that I will
Okay.
discuss that, but I think putting all that on a PowerPoint is gonna be a little bit over the
Well,
top.
I actually think I agree with Fred on that, because somebody could take a screenshot of this and then, without that context, it could potentially not bode well for us, or for y'all, I should say. So, I do think a footnote, just a footnote, so to your point, not a lot of verbiage, but a footnote that provides a bit of context.
And that footnote is that these were the recommendations that city council, of the commission 4 years ago, the city council adopted. It's now on the
One-time
books.
increase. Yeah.
It's now on the books. And make sure, and to that end, make sure that it's clear in the slide that these numbers are not the work of this commission. They're the work of the commission from 4 years ago.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask for, just a timeline, a slide that shows the timeline, and that these recommendations that we're making won't take effect until 2026. I think that's just pertinent information. So then if we start talking about what we covered, kind of the considerations that were, kind of the variables that were taken into consideration make more sense, given that we're trying to predict, we're in unpredictable times, trying to do something into the future.
Okay. Naya, do you have other comments to make on your presentation now?
No, I just wanted to know if there was anything else additional that you all felt should be included outside of the things that we just discussed.
In the same here. If there's anything additional you'd like me to.
Well,
Yeah,
if,
I would just echo, I think a slide showing a timeline of when our recommendations will actually take effect versus, what we're looking at here is recommendations from the prior, making it really clear. But otherwise, it's good.
26, these salaries we're showing here are going to be considerably higher.
Well, they're going to be what the formula specifies, but we
Right.
don't know what those numbers are.
It's based on the COLA, so basically what will happen, so this year they got a one-time increase, each of them, all those increases are located there. And then next year, it will be this base salary, which for the mayor is $204,683 plus the COLA. So whatever the COLA is, that will be added. And then once that COLA is added, that will be the salary for that year. And then the next year, that base salary plus that COLA will be the starting salary for that third year. And then whatever the COLA is, and that's the salary for the fourth year.
And that was very important to, I think,
Yeah,
our ultimate recommendation.
Yes,
The
Commissioner.
salary that the one-time increase was going to be followed by smaller increases over time, and then we were about where we thought we should be at that point in time.
Yes, can I really quickly to this point? To that, you were saying that the last commission, the report talked about, they initially wanted to give an increase to council members or council in general of 25%. And so what you all decided to do was to give them an increase of 20%, expecting that the COLA would make up that additional 5%.
Okay.
So they still got to that 5%.
Close enough, that's, yes, yes.
You said that the COLA would be something less than the 2%. We don't know. The COLA.
Oh,
could be-
that's the oddball here.
Yeah, right, okay.
That's the oddball.
Yeah.
But we were projecting out 4 or 5 years in front. We didn't know about a pandemic. We didn't know what the economic outcomes were. We didn't know, we learned what the revenue, one of the revenue questions that we have outstanding is working from home. How that changes somewhat the city's budget in moving into the future. So these things were not part of our consideration at that time. And that's why I think it's important that we understand we're working in a different environment right now. We have, let's say, accounted for getting salaries where we thought they ought to be at the end of these terms, 2024 or 2025, whenever this ends. We were comfortable with what those salaries would look like based upon a projection. I mean, yes, it was going to vary slightly, but we didn't think big jumps like we're seeing now, which is an inflationary factor that could be almost 100% of what we might have considered in the past.
And that's what I wanted to point out, Commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner, just that the projected salaries, we did look at that at an earlier meeting.
Yes.
I can provide that information again if you would like, where we took it out to 2030, and that was with a 2.23% increase each year, again, because we don't know.
One, I hate to muddy the waters, but I just want to be really clear about a piece. And so that so there's two things on the table, I thought, in my mind. And that's a function of this presentation, Greg, that you gave us, is whether or not we even think that the mayor's salary is where the mayor's salary should be, for instance, right? So the COLA, us deciding the COLA is one piece, but also us deciding whether or not we're going to make an adjustment. So I just want to be clear when we're saying to people, in 2026 is this, in 2027 is that, so on and so forth. It might be the COLA isn't the only factor that's going to determine that. If we make a one-time adjustment, that would change that as well.
That's correct, Commissioner. In fact, you're describing exactly what the last commission did.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah, as a member of that commission. yes.
exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay, just wanted to be clear, so when we say that to people, I just want them to understand, when Naya's making that statement in her remarks, that is an articulation of what the last commission did. This commission still could potentially make recommendations outside of the COLA.
Well, let me just make sure.
Right.
I understand. So like, yeah, it's basically like, this is what the COLA is the average of those 4 years prior. And then the salary increase, you all can decide to make a salary increase that is separate from that. And then the COLA kind of just trucks along as an add-on the rest of the years. But the actual, any salary increase will be made in 2026, because that is what the city attorney determined last time, that it had to be made in one foul swoop and that it couldn't be incrementally passed out over the years.
Within your work or the broader scope of the profession, are you projecting salaries for 2026?
No.
How far out would you say,
Well, so let me walk that back a little bit. So, I mean, we anticipate what our annual increase is going to be year over year, right? And we look at a number of factors. Generally, historically, it's been anywhere from 2.5 to 3%. However, based on everything that's happening in the market now, we're seeing most corporations go beyond that. Inflation is one thing, competition among employers is another thing. And so our expectation would be that as we're planning budgets, we would look to a 3% increase, knowing that there could be fluctuation year over year depending on what's happening in the economy. So I would say, to your original question, yeah, we probably look at 3% every year, but some of that is padding, and then sometimes we have to add more to it.
And we kind of talked about this last week. I believe Greg talked about this, and we talked about this, and Dr. Brandon brought it up, looking at the unions and what their pay is and what they get every year. And so I think we said it was roughly around 3%. And it was just, it's a flat increase. There isn't any COLA adjusted. So the only COLA adjustment, really COLA adjustment where it's an increase plus COLA is for these elected officials. Is that?
Well, I'll point out that it has to be that way because that's the way the charter's written.
Right, but I'm just saying,
yes.
in comparison to other classes and other unions that are kind of under the city, this is the only place that there's a COLA. The other places don't receive a COLA in this regard, like the way.
Not in this regard,
Yeah, okay,
Current collective bargaining agreements.
yes,
Across the board.
yes.
Cost of living.
yeah.
Could,
It's still
if that's
that
what's
we
bargained for,
project.
they could.
Correct. For
But you
3%.
have you negotiate with the bargaining units for a number, a dollar amount. And it may reflect something close to a COLA, but it's not. I mean, because you don't know what the COLA is going to be in 3 years, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's usually, Greg, would you say, between 2.5% to 3% is what the across the board is.
Very good. Yeah, and I have a table here somewhere.
Yeah, we could.
Is an opportunity for discretionary increases, though. So on top of the across the board.
What, for a position or for a person, you mean? Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
The across the board.
so let's say, for instance, that the position that I'm negotiating for today is $25,000. Am I arguing that, and this is a 3-year contract, 5-year contract? So in order to maintain $25,000, the purchasing power of $25,000, we agree that 2.5% per year, each year, will keep that purchasing power in place, correct?
Yes, sir.
Why isn't that a COLA?
Well, because they don't really know what the COLA is, but they
But why
plug a
isn't-
number into it
Right,
to
they created a
reflect
COLA.
what they
They created a
might
COLA.
be.
So we call it an across the board increase.
It's a COLA.
Cost of living. That's
So could that, all to say, could we just say 2%, 2.5%? Could we just not just say it and not have to tie it?
The charter requires us, the charter ties us into the consumer price index. Those ones are not.
That's true,
Only on
okay.
a comparison basis, though. What, so if we did 2%, and that's what we decide where our COLA is, that would be fine as long as the CPI does not
It doesn't
go
exceed.
lower than 2%. If
Oh, so
CPI
we
is
can-
lower
we
than
can-
2%,
okay,
then we
okay.
cannot, they
Okay.
cannot be awarded that 2%
Okay.
COLA that we have just chosen, right?
I like that.
But
So
what
not
happens?
exceed,
if
yeah,
it's
the
lower,
4 years.
right? We need to word that carefully.
Yes.
Because if we do that and we say, we have decided that, the COLA increase shall be 2%, whatever, as long as it does not exceed CPI, and then CPI is less than 2%, well, there's gotta be a
Right.
clear direction
Right.
for how those salaries go.
Right,
That's
exactly,
how I'm reading the charter.
exactly.
The way that,
And I'm not the city attorney, so, and I just sprung this on him, so I'll let him gather his thoughts.
What if it goes below the 2%?
and that's what I brought up last week when we were having this discussion. I said, if you do that, you don't know that's going to be, and that's kind of what we discussed last week.
Something.
Or equivalent to.
Or the CPI.
Whichever
Right,
side.
right.
You could write that.
Oh, yeah, lower.
As long as it's compliant with the charter.
Right,
then-
right. Well, and because it speaks, back to the fact, we don't want to get ahead of collective bargaining. It speaks to what we're really talking about here, is how do we, we're not talking about pay increases, we're talking about the spending power of the dollar amount we set. That's, and that will stand for a 5-year period of time.
Well, I call that a pay increase.
Well,
I don't know what you do, but I mean, apparently you don't, but
Well, but this whole idea of consumer price index is what is the value of the dollar from period to period, and the spending power, and if we don't, what happened before was not following some form of guideline, or maybe the charter not permitting, our salaries weren't in line. That's why we see some of these big increases. They weren't in line with the actual purchasing power that the lower dollar amounts that we were paying. So we wanted to get in line with the purchasing power. And yes, it probably does mean a price increase because everybody doesn't get that. Private employers, a lot of smaller private employers aren't looking at it that way. They're looking more from a budgetary standpoint, so what they can afford to pay. These are, in my own mind, these create additional considerations. Where we land, I'm raising questions I have no answers to. This is not good lawyering.
Well, at the end of the day, the person with the checkbook thinks it's a pay increase, and the person that's receiving it doesn't think it's a pay increase. They think it's a cost of living adjustment. Yes.
It's
Yeah,
terminology. And that's-
exactly.
We say COLA all day long, well, actually, that does say cost of living, but that's what it is. It's the value of the dollar is typically lower the next year. It's typically lower the next year. How do we adjust for that? The other consideration, which the last commission made, was what about the value of these jobs? Well, you determined that the value of these jobs needs to be higher, each one of them. Some of them were different, but each one of these needs to be higher. So you made that decision, and that was adjusted. It also recognized, though, because the charter requires it, that every year, except for that 1 year, where those percentages adjusted it, that it also needed to be adjusted for inflation.
Well, my memory isn't as good as Naya's, but the other thing that I believed was that because we were making such significant increases, well, we backed off of making the full increase because they were already so high, right? So we felt like they were significantly behind. We made a significant increase to try to get them closer to where they needed to be, but it wasn't the full breadth of what where the positions should have been, just because it was such a significant gap from, I believe, the data that we were seeing.
Yeah, well said. Yes.
Which positions are you talking about?
The
Just,
ones
I just
that
wanted
you
to.
have on here.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to be clear so when people hear it, they're like, okay.
Oh, okay.
If she's talking, because I know that council is really the only group that had a super significant increase. The mayor and the city auditor and city attorney, the mayor with 2% and the city auditor and city attorney respectively with 4%. So when you say like a large,
I don't feel like I felt like we were mindful of not jumping significantly at that point in time. And we could have potentially left some additional dollars on the table for the positions.
Got you. Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear so that people were saying, when people were thinking about the numbers, they were saying significant, they might see, oh, 2%, that's not significant, but they'll see the 20% and see it as significant. And it's just a way, so I just wanted to make it clear to people that are listening, you know, which positions are being talked about.
Let me tell you what I think we've been talking about now for 6 meetings. There are a couple of things. One is this whole issue of city council members' salaries. They received a significant increase effective the first of this year. And as you just said, I think the question is, should they receive another boost, something more than a cost of living, to maybe get them to a level that would reflect what we think those positions should really be paid.
In 2026.
Yes, sir, that's right, yeah. So that's one issue I think that we need to wrestle with. And the other one that's been brought up is this whole differential between the mayor and the 2 other executives, the city attorney and the city auditor. Currently, there's about a $4,000+ differential between those two. We've had conversations about how the city auditor, if not being required to, should be a CPA, but of course the city.
Actually, it's not in the charter that they have to be a CPA.
No, I know that.
Oh, yeah, okay, I just wanted to clarify.
But we're in agreement, at least, that they should be. And the city, I don't know that the charter specifies that the city attorney needs to be a member of the bar, but I think we all understand that they do need to be.
It does.
And-
Government would say absolutely.
yeah,
You can't come into court if,
okay.
Yeah, that's illegal.
so.
Jeez, I swore I turned that off, pardon me. Where was I? And then, of course, the issue, and there's been discussion about how the mayor doesn't have any of those requirements. I've been thinking about this a lot, and from my perspective, the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city. In the vicinity of 7,000 people report to him. 9,000 people, okay. So I've concluded in my own mind that that's a very big job and that there should be a differential between the mayor and the attorney and the auditor. I throw all of that out to the commissioners to tell you what I think are the big issues that we need to talk about and come to some resolution on. And I open it up to discussion.
I'm just looking on a comparative scale. I don't know, what is this? Which chart is this?
It's the last slide.
Yeah, I mean, the differential appears throughout our comparable cities. But, I mean, it doesn't necessarily, and in some cases, the mayors are making less money than the other two. That's, to me, not as important, only because what happens I'm not gonna use a name, but we have a miscalculation in an election. We've had that happen in this country recently. Person knows nothing about running government and how disruptive that might be. I kind of lean on, should this not be a charter question? Should we create a qualification or at some level, a qualification for this job? Everybody can't come in and run a 9,000 employee operation. I mean, that's not, That's not even, the few of us around this table can do that. So, it's kind of, what happens if we have a miscalculation in an election? As a public, the public has a miscalculation.
But, that may make plenty of sense, but isn't that a question for the Charter Review Committee?
That's my point. I mean, is that something, I don't see that where we are today, subject to future adjustments into the future, we are that different than any place else.
So
Actually, our mayor is closer to those two offices than many of the other cities that we're comparing. So that's why that's why I say the differential part doesn't seem to me to be quite the issue. It's got to be more than that. I mean, it has to be more than that. I mean, it's kind of, interestingly enough,
By more, the differential needs to be more?
no, the consideration has to go beyond the title of the
okay,
office.
yeah, following.
So for me, I agree that the differential is not a concern for me either, because generally when you look for a differential, it's because the roles report to the other roles. And in this instance, these are other elected officials, right? And so to me, a differential would feel arbitrary. The second part of what you said around, like, for me, that starts to get into the will of the people, right? Like, if we're starting to determine, who can be mayor, right? To me, that's not for the charter or whoever to outline, right? The people determine who they're going to elect. And so I wouldn't want to try to overly dictate, what the guidelines for that would be. With respect to these three roles, I mean, I do think that we need to look at the compensation for them, but we should pay for the roles separate and apart from what a differential would suggest, because we see a lack of consistency across the cities that we're looking at with respect to how they determine that. And so to me, it's what is the going rate for a mayor? What is the going rate for an attorney, a city attorney, and city auditor, irrespective of the differential, because it's not a reporting relationship. So we shouldn't arbitrarily try to place a differential in there.
Commissioner, if I may, the value of the job is what sets the pay. I know these are elected officials we're talking about. How does the organization, and in this case, how does the commission value the level of the job? Who is the chief official at the city of Columbus? I think if you asked anyone on the street, it would be the mayor of the city of Columbus. So yes, reporting structures are one thing, but this is, in my mind, from a compensation perspective, this is a different situation or different scenario because, of course, one doesn't report to the other and things like that.
That's exactly what I said, Greg. So that's exactly what I said to do, to pay for the jobs for what they are. So you use the word value, it's the same point that I just made. All I'm saying is the differential shouldn't drive it. We should determine what the value for each job is and determine the compensation accordingly.
And all I was going to say is from a compensation standpoint, if these were new classifications, for example, here at the city of Columbus, the value of these jobs would be at certain levels, obviously. The mayor would be at the highest level. Standard compensation practice is that we would look for a certain percentage differential, and it probably would not be 2%. It would probably be higher.
And I'm not suggesting that, hold on one second, Fred. I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't. So as somebody who also leads compensation for my organization as well, what I appreciate is that we don't create differentials just because of a certain level of a job, right? There is a distinction between the CEO of the organization and the SVP who reports to the CEO of the organization. But that is largely driven by the fact that it's a reporting relationship and not just because that individual is a CEO. And so all I'm saying is first and foremost, if we're costing the jobs based on, to use your word, the value of the job, that is going to naturally create a distance between the two roles. And that, in my mind, is what should drive it versus just saying, because this person, because of a hierarchy, we would put a differential in.
And I wasn't trying to contradict you, I was just trying to add some additional information, but yes, I see.
I would like to know, is the health, what would be her title? Health director?
Health Commissioner.
Commissioner?
Yes.
Is a physician, right?
That's correct.
It doesn't have to be, but in this case.
It's a physician.
She is.
I suspect that person gets paid at a different level than a lot of the other employees. And what does, that speaks to the pool of candidates that are available for these positions. So licensed practicing accountant, certified public accountant, that's a pool that's smaller than who could run for mayor or city council, city attorney. You know, what is the pool of candidates that we're approaching? This is all because it's been news, but it's, Dr. Fauci makes a whole lot more than the president. And he makes a whole lot more than the governor. Yes.
So I think that it's important to note that, like, so I'm an attorney, you know, but I've been in positions that didn't necessarily, that didn't require me to be an attorney. But that's a bargaining chip. So if I am licensed, if they're saying, okay, I would want someone that, like, we can take a JD, but if you can have an attorney, we prefer an attorney. And I have my attorney, like, pass bar passage, I can negotiate and say, because you've accepted JD preferred in the past, I could say, well, I'm licensed, so I want to ask for more money. And you wouldn't do that in this case because this is separate and it's not the same. But what I'm saying is, when you're talking about, like, Commissioner of Public Health and things of that nature, people can kind of use their licensure and certain things as a bargaining chip to say, I have this license, so I am more qualified for this position, and therefore I'm negotiating my salary based off of that additional thing. And here we're not making salary negotiations. Here you all are kind of the salary negotiators that make those decisions based on what you know the role requires.
This is a really good point. And so, Greg and Nicole, I would be interested in how the city approaches that, because if we have a job that does not require a JD and an attorney goes into that job, they do not get paid more because they are an attorney in the job. And so is that how you all treat the jobs that you would allow for what Naya just said to happen?
The appointing authority, the person responsible for saying yes to hiring that particular person, takes those things into consideration. They can choose to say, here's the classification specification, and this is what we're going to go by in terms of minimum qualifications.
Yeah, so we don't do that because, as you know, it could potentially lead to pay inequity, so on and so forth. But, and that's why I was asking.
And then, Greg sets the grades.
Pay grades.
For the classifications, and so there's a range within there that, an appointing authority, to your point, can determine where to place someone, whether it's for years of experience or some credentials they bring to the table, things like that. They can't go outside of the pay grade.
Exactly. They can't go below it, they can't go above it, no
But
green light,
there's
line,
discretion
red lining,
in-
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And they're all set to market based on research that we do and confirm and reconfirm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that layer to the conversation, but definitely still within, I think it's that clarification that it's definitely still within the window. Not like you can jump a class, but it's like, if it's 30 to 40, you might get closer to 40 than
Yeah.
the person who doesn't have the experience or credential.
And just to throw out there too, we concentrate heavily and closely on pay equity as well. That's very important to the city of Columbus.
So consider it hasn't come up in campaigns because it's been, the race has been unopposed for all these years. But can you imagine how, we elect somebody that Wall Street doesn't trust? What does that do to our bond rating?
What, you mean
What-
an auditor?
Yes.
We're in deep doo-doo.
yes. You know, it's, you know, can we have the Supreme Court says you can't represent a client in court if you're not a licensed practitioner. I don't know whether the charter says that or not. Doesn't matter. If we elected someone who's not an attorney, how can they represent the city?
The charter does require for the city attorney that you have to be a licensed member of the Ohio Bar.
It does say that.
It does.
Oh, good.
It doesn't say that. I know that conversation came about being a CPA for the auditor. It doesn't require the auditor to be a CPA in the charter. I would assume that most are, but that's not a requirement.
Yeah, I don't know enough about bond work. It might be somebody with advanced degrees in finance and economics, or, you know, I don't know what Wall Street buys or sells. But I don't think they would respect me and my opinions, and that could adversely impact the entire city. And, you know, I think we have to consider those issues. I really think that we just can't do it on the basis of what does the public want. We have to be thinking about this. I don't remember any campaigns out there, you know, where people are, you know, I'm a better CPA than another, so I should be auditor. These issues are happening behind the public's knowledge. They're not even aware that how important these issues might be because we run political campaigns. We're not even telling them the truth. You know, I mean, it's kind of, it's delicate. It does go, I think it does go to compensation, no question of that. I do believe a CEO is a higher paid compensation than most of the employees of that enterprise. But I would offer, do a survey of law firms here and see if the managing partners in the law firms are the highest paid people in those firms. Do that survey.
And compare it to what.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that that's a pretty high title, right? I'm the managing, I run the operation. Let's survey that. I will tell you that, no, the compensation of the managing partner is not what controls, you know, this is because, and yes, it has those designated public roles and, you know, internal roles. It's not that's I guess what you and I keep going back to. The differential doesn't come down to the position itself. There's just so many other factors that have to play into this. And we will do our best, because that's what we've heard, but, you know, in looking at it and being critical, in examining this to come up with the best possible solutions to address it. But I think the discussion is far greater than, you know, there's 2% one way or the other. That to me is pretty meaningless.
So, question. Speaking of numbers, I know last week, for those of you that were able to join us, and hopefully if you weren't able to join, that you were able to at least get an idea of what we kind of talked about in the meeting minutes. Something that we talked about was kind of starting to think about increases, where you're kind of falling on the increases, and if at all, you know, because an increase is not required, you could just say, you know, whatever the base pay is in 2025 plus the cost of living adjustment. And I know that, I want to say 2 meetings ago, Commissioner Ingalls had made a comment that she was leaning towards an increase for council, and then a larger increase for council and a smaller increase for the other offices. And so I know that I kind of had directed you all to kind of start thinking about that. So have any of you started thinking about that? And is there anything that you kind of want to share with your fellow commissioners and staff about what you've been thinking and kind of your reasoning why? Because we are getting closer to the end of this, and so I just want to make sure that we're having intentional conversations about what that's going to look like going forward. I mean, we don't have to have any like firm decisions made today, but, you know, consider what are some of the things that you've been thinking about as time has been going on. So I just want to make sure that we're not, and thinking about them holistically, so thinking about the auditor, the attorney, and the mayor. So, because I know a lot of our discussions have focused on council, but we still have 3 other elected offices that we need to set salaries for. And so I just want to make sure that we're mindful of that in our discussion.
So for For me, I'd like to see it as an agenda topic for our next meeting, because I think trying to digest the presentation that Greg provided for us today, to me is helpful in trying to land on all 5 of them.
Okay. And he provided another presentation last week, that had, because this isn't the full presentation from last, this is just an update.
This is an update
Yeah.
to requested items from last week.
Is that in the
You-
email that you sent out?
The email that I
Yes.
sent out to you, not this,
It's
it was attached to the
second
email
data
before
report. This
this
one's
week.
the second data report with updated. That's it. Actually, Commissioner, I might have a copy for
What
you.
you just said.
That I'd like to add Naya's question to us to next meeting's agenda, to be able to have a full discussion on what we're thinking of with respect to increases. Because this is the first time I'm seeing this. As you know, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I'd like to digest this first.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Are there,
I think these public meetings are pretty important, and I'm pessimistic that we're going to get what we really need. What does the public think? I mean, are we overpaying people? Are we underpaying people? What, I mean, I think at the end of the day, our duty goes to the residents of this community. And what makes our job so difficult is trying to project from our perch on the tree what we think is fair. And, you know, so we have a distinguished group of successful people, but that's not representative of the city entirely. So absent input from the city, we're kind of just flying, we're just making comparisons here. If our city thinks, you know, hey, with all the stuff coming in and how we made it through the pandemic and the leadership we've had and all these different spaces, hey, pay these people because, you know, we're going to, or is it, you know, we still can't trust these guys, you know, which is kind of the political side of life, you know, you're always being challenged. So to me, even if it's 1 or 2 people, please come forward if you hear me. Please come forward and offer your input, because it is extremely hard for me to place myself in the position of people. That's why it's Fred's world and it's not everybody's world. It's, you know, I have some thoughts and ideas, but it's based on a different perch on the tree than I think the general public, where the general public lies.
I do think that's tricky, though, for me, Fred, because you could get the squeaky wheel to come in and say, you know, they all make too much, and, you know, they actually should get a pay. Well,
You say that.
and they may be able to articulate that to you. They may,
They
and so
can.
at that point in time, if we are making pay decisions based on, you know, disgruntled people, right? I mean, at any point in time, you know, there are people in my organization that aren't happy with decisions that I make, right? And so I wouldn't want that to be the basis of how my compensation was determined. And so to me, the rigor with which the team is providing us data is how organizations would normally make these decisions. We look at market data, we'd align that to the standard with which increases are made, we'd value the job, so on and so forth. And to me, that is the right approach versus saying, what does the public think an individual should make or shouldn't make?
Fair. I should be able to question that, and I should, through my questions, be able to come to those conclusions. But and then I can say, well, city input, I mean, voter input, absent voter input.
But to me, voter input talks about performance, right? And so what
Does it?
what the staff should be hearing, what the mayor should be hearing, what city council should be hearing from the input is, I need to do better at X, Y, and Z. That, to me, doesn't necessarily determine whether or not where our decision should go. That, to me, just feels like a really
Not where
slippery
a
show.
decision should go. It's the input of information in making a decision. That's the distinction I would draw. I don't want to make decisions for other people's lives without other people having the right to provide input. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't drive,
I
it will
absolutely
not
agree
drive.
they should make.
It will not drive
I
my
absolutely think we
conclusions.
should have an open hearing. What I'm saying is, I'm not going to make my decision about people's compensation based off of what I hear in a public forum. To me, what we hear in a public forum should be used to determine whether or not people are performing well and whether or not they need to change their performance, or whether or not people need to be voted in or out of office. That is what that is. I feel like we have a charge, and we have to use data to make that decision, just like we would use data in our organizations to make decisions about pay.
And that's where we're going to make our decision. I mean, ultimately, show me why this was wrong. Show me why the decisions that have been made are not right. Are there things I should have considered I didn't consider? But, you know, I could answer the question, they make too much. Well, not according to the surveys that we have of, you know, of cities of similar size. So what's your beef? It's a political beef. Okay, thank you for your input. It's going to be very helpful for our determination. Just didn't want to make sure we've covered that. That would be my approach to just about anything. Anything.
Your last point is exactly what I was going to say. The purpose of the hearing tomorrow is so that, for transparency purposes, so that the public knows who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it, and to understand kind of what the nature of the work's been up until this point. And then, as you said, to maybe raise issues or questions for your consideration that maybe you missed or overlooked or did not consider, or they want to stress that you should place certain emphasis on this value versus this value. So that's the purpose of the hearing.
I think our decisions will be driven largely by the data. And it's the public's opportunity to present why, maybe not. And, you know, it's a steep climb, but I feel very awkward in making decisions for people without their input. And that's the part of this. We spent a lot of time talking about the access to this meeting, beginning at the earliest stages, and that is the reason why it was important. My comments were directed to this specific issue. How do we get participation from the public? And if we only get one or two, but we now have a voice in the room that became part of our deliberation.
I would also just kind of point out, I know Naya's done this as well, just to be mindful of the time frame that the charter requires. You have one meeting next week, after the public, tomorrow, you have one meeting next week and then one meeting the following week. So 2 meetings to basically come up with these decisions and to get this report done to be in compliance with the charter time frame. So just, you know, from a legal standpoint, just to be mindful of that.
Are there other issues that commissioners believe we should be
Should we,
considering and debating if necessary?
do you plan tomorrow evening to give the overview of what has been done in part of your presentation? Or do we want to assign?
Well, my thought was to tell them all of the presentations that have been made, to show that the due diligence that we've gone through to get to the point we're at when we have the public hearing tomorrow.
Okay. Do we want somebody to outline, we've had these discussions, kind of what Naya had pointed out earlier, or?
I do have a question to ask. Do you all want some form of talking points? Just to kind of like give a standard of who's hitting what. I'm happy to do that. There just needs to be a conversation to Commissioner Ingles' point. If you all want to do that, I'm happy to kind of like say, I mean, and I can pull them from the meeting minutes and say, you know, here are some highlights of things that I pulled. Feel free to obviously add and, you know, do things how you want to do them. But, you know, as far as the highlights, I'm happy to pull out highlights for you all to the things that I think were important in our discussion, and then if there are additional things that you want to discuss, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, 'cause I think it might be helpful at the public hearing to be very upfront, you know. We've had conversations about the limitations that the charter puts on this commission and what we're able to do. We've had conversations about what we would like to see the charter commission consider, but that's not our charge here. We've had conversations about, you know, the difference between positions in our city versus positions in others, and we've had presentations, and then we've had discussion around that. And then just some of the other, you know, overview of, like, what we've been doing, I guess, beyond just the staff presentations.
Who's going to speak to consumer person?
Oh, yeah.
Is that one of us, or is that Bill Lafayette? Yeah.
That's part of Greg's presentation tomorrow, is to explain
Oh, you got that? Okay, good.
this consumer price index.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we have Naya make her presentation, then have Greg make his presentation, pose any questions or comments, and then go through the due diligence of what we have gone through. And I'll give an overview of that, and any commissioner that
Okay.
chooses can add to that. Okay?
I don't need to send you guys any like highlights or anything like that. You guys are going to take care of that on your own.
I will probably make my own.
Okay, perfect.
Will there be a timeline shared of when our recommendations are due? That's one question, to the public tomorrow. And then the second question is, will there be another hearing once we come up with our recommendations before we give them to the charter commission?
No.
They don't go to the charter commission, they go to council.
When we give them to city council, will there be another hearing
So-
once they're complete? Because right now, we're just sharing our thinking, but not our recommendations. So we're just getting feedback on our thinking, but not what we're ultimately recommending.
So the timeline for, is addressed in the charter requirements. It's 3 months from the date of appointment, which is, you guys were appointed on January 10th.
I'm just saying, will you share that with the public
Oh, yeah.
tomorrow?
I'm happy to share, when I go over the charter provisions, that's a piece that's in there. And then to your additional question, there isn't another public hearing after that. The recommendations are submitted to council. Council has to vote on them via ordinance. So last time, it was ordinance 3300, 2018. And so essentially, Greg and I worked together to put together what we call the MCP ordinance, which will outline what you recommend. I also want to keep in mind that council does not have to accept your recommendations. Council can choose to say, you know, we want less. They cannot exceed your recommendations, but they can, I believe, go less. And they also can decide, we don't want to change from what we are currently getting. And so basically, this could be a rollover. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, if they did do a rollover, the increase they wouldn't get the increase again, but what would happen was they would just keep getting the base salary plus the COLAs. That's correct?
When you say rollover, what do you mean?
When I say rollover, I mean if they don't do anything with the recommendations, they just kind of like, we don't accept those, then.
It would continue on as the charter directs.
Yes, and that's what I mean. When I say rollover, I mean it would continue unchanged, but it would just continue to be base plus COLA. They wouldn't have, like, it wouldn't get a rollover of, like, there wouldn't be an additional 20% increase in.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. It's, the ordinance is very specific on, it was just for 2022, effective January 1st, for those percentage increases.
No.
There was no COLA, and that was very specific in the ordinance as well that council accepted and the mayor signed.
So then maybe a follow-up to Keisha's question then. So when it's passed to city council, does city council make their determination in public?
Yes.
Sure.
It's a hearing.
So that would be the
There's still,
closest then.
it's not a public hearing, but council
actually a
votes.
council
Council votes in a public council meeting.
Is the hearing, are we having a hearing now because that's dictated by, like, why are we having a hearing now and not before we present to council? Is that
Because there was
led by the?
Yeah, there was a discussion about that, and we decided that we wanted to have a hearing to solicit comment and hear questions before we make a recommendation.
Okay, so I guess I didn't understand that would be the only hearing. What I'm saying is I would think that more people would be inclined to show up virtually or in person or whatever the case may be once we give the actual recommendation. Here's where we were, or where we are until 2025, here's what we're recommending for 2026, and here's why. Right now, I feel like it's like, I guess more than half-baked, but we're essentially saying, these are the things we looked at without saying, this is what we're doing. And so I'm saying, people are less likely, we're not giving them much to react to, is what I'm saying.
So what you would want to see, Keisha, is us do a forum where we say to the public, this is what we're recommending for all of these positions, and then they can offer input on whether or not they think
Right.
those are the right numbers.
And they may not come, but that gets at the balance of, we've done how the general market does it, but we're also taking then into Fred's consideration, particularly because these are taxpayer dollars that we're choosing how to allocate, or we're recommending how to allocate them.
And then, and then what happens if the majority of the people in the audience say, I think that you all were too aggressive?
Well, I mean, ultimately, again, like you said, it could just be the squeaky wheel, and at that point, we have to make a determination as a body based off of what Fred said as we get down to, why do you feel like that, right? And then we have to determine if there's merit or not. But I personally feel like, especially given, some people may be confused about what participation means tomorrow. Some people would have come if they would have known they had to come in person. Even if they did come, I'm just thinking people are more inclined to respond to actual recommendations than what our due diligence has been up until this point.
So all of our meetings are public and they are open to the public. So at any point in time, a member of the public could come to our meeting. And if you would like for the final meeting, for there to be some language in the language that goes out that says, this is our final meeting, we plan on making recommendations at this meeting. If you would like to come and provide your input at this meeting, you are welcome to do that, because that's why the public bulletin goes out every week, and that's why we do advisory, so people know that these meetings are available and open to the public to go to. So the public hearing, I guess when you think of it, don't think of it really as any different than these meetings, because these meetings are, all of our meetings are public, and all of them are able to be attended by the public.
Okay, so I'm okay with what you just suggested, but I would want that to be communicated tomorrow and every week until we get to that point. Because, again, when you say hearing, that sounds like it's a special opportunity that maybe later on you won't have the same amount of, it won't carry the same weight. Now you're saying people could come to the general meetings and maybe, and again, I'm not trying to complicate the issue. I'm just saying, if we're doing this for public input, they're just, like you said, they could have already watched them, right? So they're coming tomorrow, they've watched all this, and what would really be their comment if they've been watching it thus far, and we haven't given a recommendation?
And so we talked about this a little bit. I'm not sure if you were at that meeting or not.
I wasn't at the last meeting.
I know you weren't at the last meeting, but I feel like we want to talk about maybe 2 meetings back, but we discussed whether or not we wanted to, when we set the public hearing date, whether or not to let people to have something recommended before we had our public hearing. And I think the general consensus was not to, because we wanted to get, or you all wanted to get public input, because if you put something out that you're not even 100% certain of and you haven't gotten any input,
I'm not saying not to do it the way it is. I'm just asking for an additional time. I'm
Oh,
not saying
okay.
that was wrong. I guess
Okay.
what I'm saying is, maybe I didn't realize that would be the only opportunity.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
So Keisha, are you suggesting that we should have a second hearing?
Or either at the last meeting, like Naya said, but to start publicizing that now. Look, tomorrow you can come, we're gonna share our due diligence, our thinking to this point. This is the timeline, yeah. When we do our recommendations or when we go to present them to council sometime before that time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time. Again, we could walk away and no one comes, but at least we've given them an opportunity, this body, to hear directly the people who are charged with coming up with the recommendations, had an opportunity to hear from the public about our ultimate recommendations before we hand it over.
Our last meeting that we have scheduled, where we have the full report and we're really just sitting down hammering out the report, we put a specific bullet point in the agenda that says public comment or public hearing on
Whatever
whatever.
it's called, yeah.
And we integrate it into that last meeting
I'm okay with
explicitly.
that, not hosting something separate, but I want to publicize that now so people know. And if you attend virtually, it's just comments and we'll get to you at some point, but you have to come in person, or we set up a WebEx or whatever the appropriate mechanism is.
So, yeah, I'm not opposed to that either. I do think that I've had difficulty getting to this meeting in the middle of the workday. It's going to be in the middle of the workday for most people, so I don't know that I would feel like the committee really wanted my input if they're asking me to come at 10 o'clock in the morning and I gotta take off work to come to offer input, which is why the normal forum is what people are accustomed to, right? Coming in the evening, so on and so forth. So I don't know how we address that.
Push it to the evening, that meeting.
What I'd say is if you want to do it that way, you come up with your numbers at the next meeting, and then between the next meeting and the final meeting, you have one other 5:30 session so that comment can be made about your numbers, and then at this meeting on the 6th, that's when you finalize everything.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest,
Here.
I was gonna suggest that, or if you want the, similar to what, Robert said, you know, that just means it's imperative that next week when we come to the meeting, that there is, a hard kind of like thought process that you all are going through individually, because mind you, these have to be individual thoughts unless we're in a public forum, so that means, especially because you're talking about numbers and reasoning, those conversations need to happen here so you can have them kind of with yourself when you're at home. But in terms of talking about it otherwise, I think it's important that we have that conversation publicly. And with that in mind, what you could additionally do if you wanted to is to have the meeting on the 30th, come in, discuss numbers, and then have the meeting on the 6th at a different time. Have the meeting on the 6th at 5:30. Instead of adding an additional meeting in between there, you could just have the meeting on the 6th be at 5:30, so it's a differential of the normal 10 a.m. timeframe, and so that be the final meeting.
I'm fine with moving that meeting, and instead of having the 10 a.m. that day, we move it to a 5:30 if that works for the commissioners. And then it's all, and that's a bullet point, a specific bullet point for the hearing itself.
And it doesn't necessarily, I mean, we've been doing them all on Wednesday, and I think doing something on the same day is good for continuity for public sake, so they know, okay, this is happening every Wednesday. But if that Wednesday, for whatever reason, doesn't work out, just during that week, it doesn't necessarily have to be Wednesday, though.
Yeah, it works.
Okay. Okay. So 4/6 at 5:30?
Yeah.
And I will,
that work?
Yes.
and I will send, because I will book CTV, and I will make sure that's in the bulletin, and get all that prepared this week. No, well,
Council chamber, you'll let us know.
I will let you know.
Nadia,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So I have your letter that you drafted that is much of the similar. How would you like us to suggest edits to this document? Do you want us to do it via track changes in a Google Doc somewhere? Do you want me to come marked up and be prepared to tell you each marking at the next meeting? How?
You have a version of it. So that was something that I was also going to discuss at the end, was that, so the executive summary, the letter from the commission, all that is boilerplate from the last report. You all are able to give your own thoughts. So the draft that you have is a very, very rough draft, because we hadn't had any of the conversations necessary for me to really create the report. I kind of just based it off of the old report. Copy and paste, and then just kind of switching around the dates to make sure that, to kind of get things standardized, but you have it in form on Word, and so you can feel free to submit.
Is there a way that the public can see my comments? Do they need to see my comments?
They do not need to see your
Okay.
comments. They just need to see the finalized report, because that document's not even public, and I purposely did not add that to the meeting materials, because I was like, it's not complete, it's something that we're still continuing working on, so I didn't want
Okay.
to have that,
Okay. then
public
I'll
when it's
make
incomplete.
changes or Track changes in Word, and I can send them to the whole listserv.
That works for me, because I'll be making some additional changes to it as I continue to refine it and edit it as well.
Okay, just.
One more closer.
Yes, sir.
So that it is a public meeting, and to the extent that public officials have specific concerns about the pathway of our thinking about this, we've thought of this public meeting as just voters, but it could be anybody.
Well, public officials are
Voters.
Right. But I just wanted to make this statement, if the auditor had something
sure.
said that this thought attaches to my compensation, and, you know, the mayor,
Absolutely.
the city attorney, the council members, we could also
Yeah.
we could also be open to hearing those kinds of questions as well.
Okay, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. So we have a hearing tomorrow evening in council chambers, I presume, at 5:30. And then our next meeting will be on April the 6th at 5:30. No, we're gonna have a meeting next Wednesday at 10.
No, well, what was proposed.
March
is moving it
30th is the 10, and then
Yeah.
April 6th is the 5:30.
30, okay.
Okay,
I was gonna put them both together.
I had contemplated in my head, but I hadn't gave it all to you, because I didn't know, like, kind of where we would fall in our work, so.
okay, so just to repeat, we have a hearing tomorrow night at 5:30. We have a meeting next Wednesday, the 30th at 10. And we also have a meeting on Wednesday, April the 6th at 5:30.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
And for tomorrow's hearing, if you all could arrive no later than 5:15, it would be greatly appreciated.
Okay? Is there anything more to come before us this morning? If not, yes, Greg.
Chairman, something Naya said about the final ordinance in which the salaries are placed to go into the management compensation plan. In the past, I have worked with the person who runs this, Naya's predecessors, but it really is, it would be Naya and the city attorney's office putting together that ordinance. So I just wanted to make that clear. So I'm happy to assist. I'm happy to provide information, do grammar checks and things like that. But, yeah, it was the city attorney's office is the precedent that's been
Yeah,
set.
and I would not be directly involved with that. We have two other lawyers in our office who deal with Legistar, so the legislation would be created. They would probably reach out to our chief counsel. Ultimately, it'll go into Legistar, and our office will approve it for submission to city council.
Okay. If there's nothing more for this morning, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? Okay, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow night.